So, Senator, I really wanted to have you on today to discuss your new book, The Failure of Representative Government and the Solution. Oh, yeah, right there. It's a great read. I just recently picked it up, and yeah, I know that we had talked about this a bit over our recent interviews that you had been working on this, and now it's finally out, and I recommend everybody get it. And just to be clear, where can folks pick up the book?
First off, you can go to Amazon, Author House, Barnes and Nobles. They have both. They have the printed copy, which I have here, and then they also, and that is $13.99, and also they have the ebook, which is only $3.99. And so you could go to any one of those venues and download the ebook, and you could have it. And I would encourage everybody, because you see what it comes down to. This is, as I put on the back of the cover, a manual to create and operate a legislature of the people. That's the answer. That's the solution, is to bring you, the people, into the operation of government as lawmakers in partnership with our existing representatives. Now, keep in mind, our representatives today have a monopoly on making laws, and laws are central to governance and to civilization, and yet the people can't do this directly under the present situation.
So I definitely want to get into the subject matter of the book, but the very first thing that I was kind of taken aback by is the acknowledgments, because you have a lot of acknowledgments at the beginning of this. Just a few of the names that you mention is Medea Benjamin, Ellen Brown, Noam Chomsky, Daniel and Patricia Ellsberg, Tulsi Gabbard, Ray McGovern, who is a friend of the show. He's been on several times, former CIA analyst. Also Cynthia McKinney, Ralph Nader, Mark Ruffalo, Richard Wolff, and that's just a few names of a couple pages here.
And Susan Sarandon.
So what? I guess just how did you come up with that list, and what was the impact of these people on your thought process?
Well, first off, that list is really very large, because I wanted to acknowledge anybody who had an effect on my life, one way or the other. And so I just figured I'll dig up all the names that I know that I've been involved with through history. Some are since deceased, but I wanted to put their names in there to recognize them. And so if a person has interfaced with me in the past, they could look at this acknowledgement and see that their name is there. It's a simple process. I want to thank all these people that have had a very beneficial effect on my life, period. That's all I was trying to do. There's no question this is the last book that I'll ever write. And so I thought that it was apropos at my age, pushing 90, to go ahead and recognize these people and thank them.
So I did want to read just one excerpt from the book that I think really summarizes the overall thought about all this, or your main pitch. You write, calling representative governments throughout the world democracies is a misrepresentation of how we govern ourselves, and as a result establishes barriers to possible change by perpetuating the myth that the people rule our government. From my observations, there are no democracies in the world where the people rule. Instead, each election day, the people give their power to representatives who then rule on behalf of the people through a monopoly on lawmaking. You then go on to reference Switzerland as the best model, but still flawed. And then you go on to write, the universal form of governance where citizens vote to empower their elected officials to represent their interests is simply representative government, not a democracy, where people would rule directly. Accepting this definitional distinction improves our understanding that bringing the people into the operations of government as deliberative lawmakers, deliberative direct democracy, is the answer to dysfunctional representative government. However, empowering the people as deliberative lawmakers is anathema to the selfish interests of the elites whose power to control society would be greatly diminished. Consequently, we stay mired in systems of government that do not work. So I guess overall, where did you first learn about direct democracy? Who were some influences on you in learning about this concept?
Well, first off, when I was in the Senate, I was grappling with the possibility, because politicians, when they run for office, say, vote for me, I empower the people. Well, that's not so. When you vote for a person, he's the person or she's the person that's empowered, not the people. And they may or may not choose to listen to what the people want to have happen under their term of office. So I was grappling with that, and when I left the Congress. I was very unhappy with the dysfunction of politicians and the operation of government. And for 10 years after I left office, I never made a speech, never got involved, but I read profusely what was going on and the basis of the Constitution. And in 1990, it just hit me like a ton of bricks that the answer is the people. Now, the problem is that the people do not have any tools to implement any lawmaking. And that those tools are all usurped in the Constitution, which, of course, put all these tools in the hands of representatives so that they could protect slavery. That's the issue. And the ratification was done through conventions of the Constitution. And so it was by studying how that happened, and it was easy to do, well, not easy, it took 25 years. It was to bring the concept of how the country was created by the ratification of 9 states in conventions, ratifying the Constitution and causing it to become the law of those 9 states. Well, we're doing the same thing. We're asking the people if they wish to, this is in a national election, we're asking the people, do you wish to become a lawmaker? And if a majority of those who voted in the last presidential election vote for this amendment to the Constitution and an accompanying law setting up legislative procedures, that if the people vote in a majority for that, it becomes the law of the land, just the way the people voting for ratification under Article 7 made it the law of those lands, those 9 states. And then, of course, states followed after that. Now, the reason why the opponents to the Constitution just withdrew from the battlefield is because they realized that the functioning of, or rather the dysfunctioning of the Confederation that was what we were living under at the time was not working. And so we have the same situation today. We have a dysfunctional system of representative government, not only in the United States, but around the world. And so once we hold this national election, which would not be done by government, I must confess I have no faith in representative government today that it would do the right thing. It wouldn't, because it's controlled by the elites, and they have all the power. And the power is devolved by them to representative government, which has a monopoly on lawmaking. So where are the people in all of this? Begging and protesting in the streets for the government to do the right thing? No, there's only 2 venues for change. One is the government, they don't want to do it, and the other is the people, and the people don't have the tools to do it. And yet I outline in this book the detailed tools, and the statement on the back of the book says it all, and that is a manual to create and operate the people's legislature. It's all there in the book in detail, very great detail.
And you do actually have some legislation in here, or proposed legislation. I was just wondering, did you come up with that yourself? Did you write those proposed pieces of legislation, or just did you have any influence regarding those?
No, it's all mine. There's no question about that. And I had a lot of support of supporters, board members over. Now, you got to keep in mind, this is a 25, 30-year process. So this didn't jump on the table. This was trying to figure out a system of governance that would be effective and procedurally effective. And so what we've done is we create a constitutional amendment that asserts our sovereign power to make laws, and two, that buys into the national election. So, and this is just like Article 7 of the Constitution. When the people voted in the 9 states that ratified, the conventions that ratified those 9 states, that the fact that they did that was proof that this is what the people wanted. So we had the same thing in our process. And when you vote for the Constitution, you vote for your sovereignty, but also you vote for the election that permitted you to create the legislature of the people. So that's a self-actuating aspect, which is exactly the way Article 7 works in the Constitution that created our government. So then we have several other issues that are important to be in the Constitution, not the least of which is appropriating the money for the Citizens Trust to operate. And of course, we have plans to go ahead and have people registered for life, and that all of the elections that take place for initiative, for legislative proposals or initiatives, all of those are elections that are conducted over a 7-day period, 24 hours a day, and with the most modern technologies. It's an abysmal situation when you realize that in 1776, the Wealth of Nations came forward describing how the capitalist system worked. And at the same time, you had the Declaration of Independence by the United States. And then in 87, developed a constitution. Would you believe that there's been no substantial change in the Constitution since 1788? And then with respect to capitalism, it has raced ahead with this whole concept of science leading us to a better life. And we are better off than we were then. And that's only if we stay out of war. But the advancement of science is just been awesome. And yet we're living under a system that hasn't essentially changed from 1788. So does that not cry out for a desire to make changes so that we can go into the 21st century with an intelligent process of human governance?
So I was just wondering, too, because in the acknowledgments you had mentioned Noam Chomsky and Richard Wolff, and both of them are really proponents of workplace democracy, or in Noam Chomsky's case, syndicalism. I'm just wondering, too, do you think that this sort of direct democracy, that also would involve changing the workplace at all and empowering workers and having more worker co-ops as opposed to hierarchical type corporations?
First off, you've got to understand that what this is putting the tools into the hands of the people to bring about what Noam Chomsky wants. What's unfortunate is that what Noam Chomsky wants, he's got no vehicle to bring it about. This is the vehicle that will bring about what he's talking about. And this comes up to the criticism of all pundits. What they say, they recite all the problems that we have in a country or in the world, and then they say, well, the people ought to do something and the government ought to do something. Well, we now know the government won't do anything, and the people don't have the tools to do the things that they want done. And what I'm doing with this citizens initiative is putting the tools into the hands of the people that could realize what Chomsky wants, what Howard Zinn wants, what the people want. And I would venture to say that Bernie gets elected president, he'll have a tough time getting through a Democratic Congress the agenda that he has put forth to the American people, which is a great agenda. And I would say that the best way for him to guarantee the success of his agenda is to enact the legislature of the people, who then can face up to this agenda directly with or without representative government.
So something else that you spend a good deal of time on in the book is talking about foreign policy and the possibility of nuclear war. You talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close we came to global annihilation. And you talk about the number of nuclear warheads that the U.S. and Russia still have, and that other countries have as well. Why is consideration for foreign policy so important? Why did you make it such a focal point in this book that when we're talking about, having, I guess, seemingly domestically more direct democracy?
Well, I think that if you look at it closely, there is no difference between foreign policy and domestic policy. This is today in the 21st century, where what happens on the other side of the planet affects what happens on this side of the planet. And you can see that whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in China, whether it's in Southeast Asia. So no, there's no distinction between the two. And this is where Americans come up short, because they think in terms of, oh, just our country. Well, it's not our country anymore. It's the world. And we are citizens of the world. And the sooner we recognize that, the better off we'll be. And as you noticed in the last chapter, the 21st century, I point out that until we have a federated global system of governance, essentially following the model in the United States of 1788, and that is to develop a federated form of governance, then we'll be able to deal with peace. We'll be able to deal with the environmental problem that we face. The nuclear problem is a possible disaster that could destroy the planet. Now, what is actually destroying the planet in the long term is, of course, the environmental problems that we face. And we're not facing them properly either in the United States or worldwide. Politicians make great speeches about it, but nothing happens after that, because our system of representative government is controlled by the military industrial complex, and also by the capitalist countries that continue to pollute, or capitalist enterprises that continue to pollute the environment, which if it continues, which it will, unless we change the nature of human governance, it'll continue and destroy the planet.
So, once somebody does read your book, it seems as though it's quite a big initiative to then, start trying to elect, federal representatives to try to introduce this legislation. What do you think are the very first steps? Is it just people, reading this book and then getting involved in their town councils and commissions? Is it, trying to work with third parties, or just overall? I mean, what are the very first steps that we can take to start working towards this?
Okay, first is education. You've got to understand that there's no recommendation I'm making in this book that involves representative government, our government, or any other government. In fact, I have no faith in the government. If you brought the government into the process, they'll sabotage it. You won't get it. So what we have to do is, it's a two-pronged approach. This book is used to try to educate people to the fact that they are the solution, not their leaders. They are the solution, and how the solution would evolve into their becoming lawmakers. And how that would be done is after we have a year or more of this book being pushed worldwide, and I encourage people to buy it, to either get it on the ebook, push friends to get it. The more we make in terms of selling the book, the more we're going to plow back the money into expanding. We're in the business of creating a thoughtful knowledge among the American people and the people of the world that they are the answer, not their leaders. Now, once we take polls and we realize that the American public is now realizing that they are the answers, but they've got no tools to do it. That's when we step in, and a group of people, would then start a national election, and it will be an expensive election. And we may have some big hitters, whatever. We'll raise money. Now, the money we raise for education is tax deductible. When you buy the book, essentially it's tax deductible because it's an educational process. But when we start the election, it's not tax deductible. We have to raise the necessary, and it'll be like a presidential campaign. It'd be $100 million plus to go ahead and hold this election with no member of the government involved. And then and of course it will have a great deal of integrity because it will have total transparency, which we don't see in government elections at all. So with the total transparency, as people vote, more people will recognize their vote and be able to check on the fact that they voted. And then once we get to the only national criteria we have is the presidential election. So once this election that we're holding, which is an organization, will be Philadelphia 2, that's the name we'll give it, they will hold this national election, not involved with any part of the government. And then once the number of people who vote in affirmative for this new package, a constitutional amendment and a Citizens Legislative Procedures Act, once the people vote for that as a majority of those who voted in the last presidential elections, we will declare this the law of the land. Now, who would oppose it at that point in time? It would obviously be the extreme, the elites, who will try to sabotage it during the process of the voting and the educational aspect of it. But then the issue will be enjoined where enough people, 60, 70, 80, 100 million American voters would have voted for this legislation, and obviously the elites would try to sabotage this at their peril. And so that's the process. One is education, because most people don't know anything about the initiative process of making laws, how they could turn around and introduce legislation. They can't. There's a monopoly by representatives, and the representatives are controlled by the elites. So the only way you're going to break that is to go ahead and educate the people as to what's possible. And that's why the book is so important, because it details, and I say it on the back, it's a manual to create and operate the people's legislature. And so once enough of the people of the United States recognize that possibility, then we conduct an election. So that could be a year, 2 years away, 3 years away. However long it takes us to educate the people that they are the answer. You are the answer, not your elected representatives. So we have nothing to do with the government, the federal government, state government, local, nothing to do with them. This is all done on a voluntary basis and with total transparency and with total ethics.